Yesterday, I had the distinct privilege of interviewing Lady Borton, who was in Vietnam in 1969 on a humanitarian effort, and at first as a nurse, and then a journalist photographer, and then as a reparations specialist throughout the aftermath of Vietnam. She has a full life and many stories to tell, and many friends that span the globe. But we had the most amazing conversation about women in resilience, about the history that gets erased, and about drawing correlations to history then and now in ways that could help us today navigate on our own soil. So it was fascinating. It was thought-provoking. It was encouraging. She is a force to be reckoned with at 82 years old. And what she saw before, during, and after, and in the years since in her humanitarian efforts, is a story of history that can't be forgotten. You'll hear lots of stories from her. I did my best not to interrupt too much, and I want you to welcome her and her viewpoint just as much as we did. Be sure to like, subscribe, or share if you have anybody who would be interested in this. Good morning. I am so excited that you're taking this time to meet with me and to have any kind of conversation around your experiences of Vietnam. Because we carry a certain amount of privilege that allows us not to see beyond our white bubble.
Right.
And I'm permeating. I want to permeate that for them and for me. I started this to keep me from going back into my comfort zone. And I started with the brown and black voices. My daughter-in-law, as I shared with you, is from Vietnam, and I'm still 10 years later trying to understand who she is, how she arrived, and what her experience is. So I have a very personal interest in this. I was a kid when Vietnam was happening on television.
Mhm.
You were on the ground. Share with me whatever you will and what you learned about women in war zone, out of war zone, pre, post, after, and how to navigate, because I really feel like there is a thread here that's going to apply to our situation today. I
Mhm.
just don't know yet what it is because I don't have enough information.
Yeah, and I think part of what we learn is whatever information we thought we had, there's another side to it.
Yeah.
And some other people have another side, and their point of view is it's valid and it's very interesting. And when you listen to it, then you go, oh, 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 you know. Not what I
Wow.
thought. And that, if I were to summarize my experience of Vietnam itself, it's not what I thought. Always, always, again and again. Oh, not what I thought. Now,
Hmm.
when you go down to the level of ordinary people and you get their stories, a little piece here, a little piece there, and you start to put them together, it's like, oh, and we're taught in our schools and on our media um, something that's not the full story.
Right.
And when you talk about, white women of privilege,
Mhm.
by chance, I grew up in George Washington's hometown. That is where Mount Vernon is. I think I had 6 years of Virginia history. Was there ever any discussion of slavery? I lived in what I describe as apartheid Virginia. On the other side of the railroad tracks was the black high school.
Yeah.
No kids of any color other than my white face in school with me. I was ordinary public school, right? Well, we had a football stadium, we had a vocational wing, we had this, we had a gymnasium. They didn't have any of that.
Mhm.
None of it. We used segregation. No, it was apartheid. Go
Uh-huh.
in the Murphys, 2 water fountains, 2 restrooms for women, and so forth. So, and that's what I grew up in. And I went north to college to get away from that. And I ended up in college, it was all women, white women, right? So, it's deep in our culture. For me in Vietnam, it reverses. I'm the only white person often, the only foreigner and the only white person. That's regular for me. Here in New Hampshire, nobody notices me, right? Because the demographic is mostly white. And I'm just sort of ordinary looking for somebody my age, right? But in Vietnam, I stand out. And for years I stood out because my hair then was quite red, very curly, opposite. And by then I was taller, right? I've shrunk, right? So I was a circus come to town. Uh, and and I did very early when I was in South Vietnam during the war. I was there. I was also in North Vietnam during the war, and very few people in both. Right at the end, I led the only educational delegation to go to North Vietnam because, unbeknownst to everybody, including the Vietnamese, including what we call the North Vietnamese, the war was ending. It was all collapsing, and they did not expect that to happen. So I saw that, and I perceived that, although I couldn't actually ask people. One of the people who was in charge of my group, a woman named Phu, to this day, one of my very closest friends, but that was 50 years ago. She was just out of school, very bright, personable, irrepressible, funny, and we later got assigned together when I was there from 1990 on. And that was just by luck or maybe good fortune, or I think actually planning. They put me with one of their very best people, and she was indeed terrific. When you look at women there, to sort of speak in general in that culture, their earliest, how do I say this, historical heroes, by that I mean documented as opposed to legendary, okay, are the famous Trum sisters, generals, and who defeated the Chinese. And Queen for, this is 43 AD. Where was our country then? Yes, many Native American nations in it, but not the white folks yet, right? But there, she rules for 3 years, 43 AD, right? And another very famous woman general in 248 AD. So all the kids growing up in Vietnam all know about these heroes. And they are, when I say they're historical, if I talk about the Trum sisters, the names of their generals are known. That's why I mean it's history. It's documented. And yes, of course, there are legends around it, but it's documented. And she did the first poetry of battle in their history. That remains, right? So that gives a heritage that, and that isn't to say that it's an equal society, because early on is Confucianism, which is very patriarchal, right? But in their ancient history, there are women who play important roles, whose names are known, and whose writings are still with us. So a really fun project I worked on, translating Vietnamese women's poetry, which goes back to the very early ones all the way up to modern times. And bilingual means both languages side by side. So when you translate, you try to stay with that voice. But if you're doing it side by side, then people can check.
Yes.
Right?
Uh-huh.
Right. And you have to, the languages are really opposites. So, and poetry is really the hardest thing to translate. The ordinary people's poetry, the very earliest poetry, it's called Kazao, which is the poetry that, and that's kind of the piece that I saw and put in place was, okay, wait a minute. That poetry's from the rice paddies. And I would know that because of the work I did talking to farmers in the rice paddies, all up to my knees, and they were all standing on the bank saying, "Don't let her lily white legs go in the mud for the leeches to eat." And the leeches like it. In that wet rice culture that you have in Vietnam, not in China. It's a dry rice, but you're in the mud. Your feet are in the mud.
Yes.
And the women do the transplanting.
Mhm.
They're very famous pictures of lines, rows of women transplanting. It's very hard work because you have to hang yourself from your hips to do it. You don't
Mhm.
bend over, you just do your back in. You actually hang from your hips to do it. But it's still just backbreaking work to transplant. And they do that, and the men are doing the plowing with a water buffalo,
Mhm.
which is solitary. So, the piece that I put in is the men have always claimed this folk poetry, and I say, no, it's done by women because you're out there with that group of women, and it is backbreaking work. And what do? You tell funny stories. There's always a jokester. There's somebody who's a jokester, who's sort of a born entertainer, who starts singing a song, or they make up songs, and they made up bawdy songs, right? Because that makes people laugh, right? And who's going to listen but the other women in the line, right? And if you have that kind of, and in our culture, the work teams are men. It scarcely exists now in the last 10, 15 years because the agricultural work has been commercialized and it's done with tractors.
Mhm.
Same thing where I had a farm for 50 years in Ohio, and we were always, the whole community showed up to bring in the hay.
Yeah.
Whole community, all the little kids, everybody had something to do. And now it's done by one guy on a tractor and round bales, which they leave
Mhm.
in the field. There's no community, no family work involved in that now. But that's in the last 10 or 15 years in my little Appalachian, Ohio former community. Well, that same thing is happening in Vietnam. It gets industrialized, and the elements of community don't exist in the same way because you're not working together. For Vietnamese during the war, and the war in the South, very different in the South and in the North. In the South was occupied by the United States. We
Yes.
had an occupying army,
Mhm.
500,000 people in a country. South Vietnam had about 14 million people.
Mhm.
That's one US soldier for every 28 people.
Mhm.
You get a classroom of kids,
Right.
right? There's a soldier, right? That's the ratio everywhere, occupying
Mhm.
and fighting and I think beside themselves because it was an impossible task, no matter how you look at it, because we go back to the history, which includes the women, for millennia, they have been invaded by the Chinese,
Yeah.
and then by the Portuguese, and the Dutch, and by the French, and by the Americans. And so, and when a community is invaded, it's really fascinating. People who've been feuding, families have been feuding, right? But they bond together
Common
because your whole
enemy.
community, your schools, your families, your houses, even if you've refused to talk to that next door neighbor,
Yeah.
suddenly you band together. And I saw that in that neighborhood in Appalachian, Ohio, when the American Electric Power came in and they were going to long wall, that is, they were going to mine under our houses.
Oh.
And that community banded together, and
Mhm.
people who had not spoken to each other for a generation, Hatfield McCoy kind of stuff, but not
Uh-huh.
killing each other, but not
Yeah.
all together in the same living room, and everybody playing a role, and undercover stuff, and
Oh, okay.
everybody knowing what to do because they're going to go into my farm and yours, right? Or whatever, you got to stick together. And that kind of community, and also this ancient history from the 1400s of what you do is let the invader come in, let them
Mhm.
come in, and then bog them down. They get bogged down in this horrendous climate, 1,000 degrees humidity, mosquitoes, leeches.
Yeah.
Leeches are worse than mosquitoes somehow. They hang on. The
They're
mosquitoes,
gross. Yeah.
they're gross, and then they're bulbous,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
then when you knock them off, you bleed, right?
Oh, yeah.
And there's a way to stop that, right? Take your conical hat leaf and you dab it on and it stops it.
Uh-huh.
So it's you let the invader and then you take them down, nip, bite by bite, like mosquitoes, bite by bite,
Okay.
leech by leech. And that's, of course, what was done. And there was also the North Vietnamese army, particularly at the end,
Mhm.
which was frontal war, right?
Right.
But what we call the Viet Cong, the local resistance, but
Mhm.
also done by North Vietnamese early on, was the drive the elephant mad, and you drive the elephant mad by biting in its ear.
Oh.
It can't reach its ear with that huge leg. Can't get there, right? And the
Uh-huh.
women did a lot of that. And the women in the South during the war, they were the spy system,
Okay.
particularly the quite well-to-do, educated women,
Mhm.
school girls, 15 to 18, whatever, wearing this an alzai. You would know what that dress is. It's like
Mhm.
just an evening gown,
Yeah.
right? With a tight bodice top and then panels, and you wear satin trousers underneath
Yes.
and a high mandarin neck. Now,
Mhm.
thank God they have a more gracious neck so you can breathe. It's like there, even I feel gracious in it, but whoa, is it an uncomfortable garment?
Uh-huh.
You either boil or you freeze because it's open, in the winter is you're open at the edges there.
Uh-huh.
Um, but these gracious women, and a lot of people whom I knew and know, some still living, who, would just make friends with officers, American officers. So one woman I knew very well in the deep South in Tinsan province was a schoolgirl, right? And it's a little flirty stuff, and ended up going into the officers' club in the
Mhm.
division headquarters. And then they're all drinking, and
Right.
she's hearing everything. And then that's taken back.
Mhm.
Right? The
Gotcha.
people who were sweeping. Right.
Uh-huh.
So I was in Quang Ngai. My task was to pick up our mail, which came through the APO, the American Post Office. That's the Army Post Office.
Mhm.
So I was there every day. And the guards would be checking the women who'd been sweeping and cooking and cleaning and so forth, as they came out, checking their baskets. And I just looked at them, I just thought, they're fools. They're not
Right.
taking anything in their baskets. It's all in their noggins, all in their heads.
Uh-huh.
They've been all over everywhere. They've
Yeah.
seen the map. What maps are on the table? This is where the area where I was is where the My Lai massacre happened.
Okay.
Not far away, but they knew all the operations. The maps are on the table. They know the alert signs. They
Got it.
see if there are more arms,
Mhm.
and they don't take any notes on it. They're
Mhm.
bright. They
Mhm.
might not be educated. They don't know English, but they know our
What they need to
American
know.
switch. They know what they need to know. And
Yeah.
they go back home and they went right down into that area.
Mhm.
That's where they came from, the area where that massacre occurred. But there were massacres all over everywhere. And those
Right.
were ordinary people. You couldn't tell who's on what side. For
Mhm.
me, that's no problem because we didn't take sides. We were civilians and we treat anybody who's injured, who's not
Mhm.
military. We didn't
Uh-huh.
treat military because there was a military hospital to treat them. Right?
Right.
Right, but civilians.
Mhm.
And when you get their stories and you start to piece it together and you can see there's a web. And
Yeah.
this is an interesting point about that web. So and and it's largely women because the men have all been drafted, right?
Yes.
They're off in the army. So it's largely women left behind and elders. And
Mhm.
in Metau, which is a major city in the Delta in South Vietnam, on April 30th, that's the day that it all collapses. It's really May 1st, but that period, there was a big gathering in that city once the revolutionaries completely took it over, and they got together at a house owned by Nguyen Van Thieu. That's the former president who had left the country. All right. They got together at his house. Of course, he's not there. He's left the country. But and this woman I described, who went into the American officers' quarters, she went to that, and she said it was amazing how many people were there she did not know were in the resistance. She didn't know. You only
Right.
know your little group because you're working undercover in an occupied country. And if you are arrested, you're going to be tortured
Yeah.
and to give names.
Yeah.
But if you're a little group of three,
And you don't know any names.
you don't know, and the names are changed. Every time they went to a new assignment, they changed their alias, but you only know the people in your group.
Mm-hmm.
And one person in that group reports out. Another person in that group gets directives coming in.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the most you can tell is
One
two
person.
names, which are aliases, plus one from
Yeah.
outside or inside, depending if you're one of those other two. Right. That's the most you can tell because the web is that united but fragmented.
Got it.
Right.
Yeah.
And, all across. So with the Tet Offensive, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
all of the women I talked with locally in that province, they all knew they were busy cooking and preparing and hauling arms and all the rest. They knew there was going to be in their little, I was in one village, but then I met also people across the whole province, but I was in one village in one district. So that's just
Mm-hmm.
like a little hamlet in New Hampshire. And but everybody I talked with there and all around, they all they were preparing for some little battle. They did not know until they heard it on the radio what it was, right?
Got it. All
Right?
right.
Right? They
Yeah.
they didn't know until it was on the radio, right?
Okay.
And but they were doing all the prep work for it. And they carried the messages. Um, they carried maps. So one woman I talked with, and the way you transferred often was in the market. You're sitting there hunkering, sitting or
Mm-hmm.
hunkering with your wares in front of you, and somebody comes to buy, and you sell them a pack of cigarettes,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a map in the cigarettes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever, on direction or whatever. Very little on paper
Mm-hmm.
because it can be caught and captured.
Right.
And, so she told me sitting there and the police came. You don't even know in the police who's on which side, but the police came and she knew there was a map there, but she'd already seen it, so it was in her head. So she ate the map, put it in her mouth, and didn't leave it there. She ate it.
Uh-huh.
So they could not get the map, right? The map's in her head. She could
Yeah.
draw it if she needed to, right? It's all
Mm-hmm.
in her head, but she did actually have a piece of paper that was incriminating.
Right.
So she ate it, right? But it's not lost because it's in her head.
Right.
And the ability to, it's theater, plays
Mm-hmm.
some other role. Um,
Well, and to
Lady
have the
Borton.
resistance so integrated, so
Right,
organized, without people realizing how organized it
is,
is is that the result of centuries of occupation and experience and trauma response and training?
I
Because here
guess,
we are in this moment in time in our US history with generations that have no real wartime experience on our soil,
right.
kind of scrambling to know how to resist, didn't know we'd ever need to resist, particularly our own governmental
Yeah,
forces.
right. That's, and the other part of that is they have that history of it, but they did have a system. And
Mhm.
that's it's there's a big mistake I think we Americans make, and we've been taught to make it, is to think of this as a question about communism. Not at all. Not at all. Um, it's nationalism, which is entirely different.
Right.
Nationalism is my control. Well, New Hampshire, live free or die, it's like our control of our space. Um, that's what that means. It's, our control of our space,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not, it is an ism, it has an ism at the end of it, but it's about that nation and all of that war from 1945. It doesn't end until 1990, not
Right.
1975, but 1990.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about Vietnam being able to be its own country instead
Yeah.
of a colony,
Mm-hmm.
not a French colony, not an American colony, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's all when it starts in 1945, and they're celebrating on September 2nd, it's the 80th anniversary
Mm-hmm.
of their independence. And the celebration they're doing now is what they call the August Revolution, which was largely peaceful, where they took power. And we intervened, we being French,
Right.
British, US. And part of what I'm busy talking with Vietnamese by Zoom, and I've had them here, and I was in Hanoi, of course, talking with them, saying, just look at the dynamics of what happened. Vietnam was the first colonized nation in the British, French, and US empires to stand up and declare independence and have a brilliant, charismatic, absolutely dedicated leader, that's Ho Chi Minh, and with the ability to draw equally brilliant people to, to him, not be
Mm-hmm.
threatened by them, and give them tasks and assign them and and get a strategy going.
Mm-hmm.
And he did that. What he brought into it was, yes, the communist structure, but that wasn't what he was interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Not communism, nationalism. And I spent a couple of years translating his writings from 1945 to 54, because he starts with zero in 1945. Nobody even knows his name. Ordinary people.
Okay.
They did not know it. His little group did, but not ordinary people.
Mm-hmm.
Famine, no money, right? Nobody recognizes him. And how does he do it? And he's talking always about independence and unification,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
never about, quote, the party or communism, never. And
Right.
at the Declaration of Independence, the people I knew, they passed on, who were there, educated, active in what's
Mm-hmm.
called the Viet Minh, the Revolutionary Front, they had never heard of the party or communism, never heard of it.
Okay.
But it has a structure. And that goes back to what you were saying. It has a structure of people's organizations. So the women are drawn together from the national level, province, it's like our state, district, that's like our county,
Mm-hmm.
town,
Right.
local, that's our local community. All right.
Yep.
All have these members of the women's union. So it's this big pyramid structure,
Mm-hmm.
very interesting if you're working in development, as I did for years with my colleague Fu, and we would do some very local project, because we were only four of us, and we were very small, but we could be really effective. We could work out a new idea, a new project locally, get it
Mm-hmm.
going, work out the kinks, go all the way up to the top
Mm-hmm.
of the structure that goes like that, right?
Right.
And it could move across the whole structure.
Mm-hmm.
We did that with irrigation. We did that with credit and savings, where we could take an idea, work out the kinks.
Yeah.
You have to work out the kinks, and locally, and it's locally owned, right? And it's not us, right? You get the right people and get it working, and then you work, and they got zest, you know,
Uh-huh.
and it's women's unions. So the women can organize across the whole country. Can't do that in the United States. We don't
Mm-hmm.
have a structure that goes. The closest thing is maybe the Red Cross, but not
Mm-hmm.
really. It's just
Right.
we don't have that kind of structure, but they have it for youth, for elders, for the Buddhists, the Catholics, the Protestants,
Mm-hmm.
senior citizens, of course. So
Mm-hmm.
the elders, veterans, you know, it's a nationwide structure, and it means that you can work locally going up or top
Mm-hmm.
going down. And that allows them, it's a it's an important structure. And during the war, they had that structure,
Mhm.
right? So it wasn't just a local group. The
Ah,
local group was connected. The people in that local group didn't know exactly how they were connected,
got it.
right?
Mhm.
Because it was wartime, and you're taught the three no's, you know. It's very
Right.
helpful, you know. I didn't hear anything. It's the three monkeys, you know.
Yes.
I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything. I don't know anything, right? You know, right? That's your safety. You don't know anything. You're better
Right.
not to know, right?
Yes.
Because, oh, I don't know anything, you know, not me, right?
Uh-huh.
Although they might know a great deal.
Yeah.
And you know, the outsider can't tell, and even the insiders couldn't tell. You know,
No.
my friend who went to that party, and here are all these other people
Mhm.
whom she didn't know were part of the web and the network.
Right.
Right?
And so did that web encompass all of Vietnam, or was it a South Vietnam, North Vietnam, two different? Was it
All of
different?
Vietnam, all of Vietnam.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And, you
Awesome.
know, a lot of the resistance was, yes, indeed, Hanoi generated, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this August revolution that happened 80 years ago, it was across the country. And those
Mm-hmm.
are local people doing it,
Yeah.
local leaders who are doing it. But they're connecting to
Mm-hmm.
Hanoi a lot of the guidance for
Mm-hmm.
what's known as the National Liberation Front, and then becomes the Provisional Revolutionary Government. It's a group we call Viet Cong. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So the leadership, yes, members of the Communist Party, but and they were getting directives from Hanoi, and they followed them or they didn't follow them sometimes. They took
Mm-hmm.
their own initiative on it. Um,
Right.
but it was coordinated. And
Yes.
part of what I've done when I translated the memoir by Nguyen Binh, who's the only living signatory to the Paris Agreement, and a woman, right? And
Mm-hmm.
with my colleague who's now in Saigon, but for years was in Hanoi, she's now 90. Um, Whenever Madam Bin mentions somebody, I want to know who that person is,
Mm-hmm.
because the younger generation doesn't know these people. Certainly
Right.
foreigners don't. And
Mm-hmm.
but younger generation of Vietnamese don't know. And my colleague Dam Tu went scouting around, and they all changed their names. It's very hard to trace them,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
So my question was, you know, who is who, and where are they now? Did they survive? What did they do? And because she's starting out at, you know, it's childhood. She's in the resistance as a teenager, just like
Mm-hmm.
young people, students were in our country resisting the war,
Mm-hmm.
organizing, right? And then they're just putting together this framework. She's one of the kids putting it together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then people above her, but she's just a bright young person,
Mm-hmm.
dedicated. And when you go back and sort of ask people why, it's not about the isms. Why did you do this? Why are you on? Because in the South, there was a choice. You could be on the US side,
Mm-hmm.
right? You could be on the revolutionary side, or you could try and wiggle between, right?
That's
Right?
good.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and try and make your way between. And those were the three basic choices.
Mm-hmm.
People whom I knew, boat people on Pulau Bedong in 1980, they had sided on the American side, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe tried to wiggle. The people who stayed behind, whom I interviewed for the book After Sorrow, that was Sensing the Enemy, the boat people on for After Sorrow. So these are ordinary villagers like my neighbors here,
Mm-hmm.
farmers, but farmers working rice paddies and
Right.
living underground during the war. And you know, why
Mm-hmm.
you know, why did you make this choice? And it all came down to a childhood memory. So the woman
Just
I described who went into the officers' quarter,
mm-hmm.
her uncle was arrested during the Ziem regime. He's the person we brought in from the United States to be the leader. Um,
Uh,
Uncle was arrested and dragged behind a truck around and around the village until he died. And everybody had to watch this.
mm-hmm.
And it was a favorite uncle.
Mm-hmm.
And and you didn't dare show any emotion, because if you showed emotion, that showed you were connected to that person,
Oh.
right? And you would be arrested. So you must be totally impassive as you're watching this, right? And she was a child.
Mhm.
And, and she said to me, we always know who was on which side, but it was like that just cemented for her. And
Mhm.
she was from an educated family.
Mhm.
The woman who was my chief, I stayed with her family, whatever, sort of a great storyteller, could write her name and nothing more. Learned to write her name when she was 18 because of
Mhm.
the war. Her father was the person who had taught literacy, but with all
Mhm.
the uproar and everything. And why did she join the Revolution of the Viet Minh? She came home once from market, and her grandfather, she found the French had killed her grandfather, and there he was, dead, with his hands in front of his eyes, and the
Mhm.
bullet holes through his hands, through his eyes, right?
Mhm.
And that was it. There was her decision. Now, all those
Mhm.
decisions ultimately are emotional. It's what
Right.
happened to somebody in your family or what you saw. And
Ah,
it's not about isms, it's
that's
about the foreigners are doing this, right? Or the foreigners are paying Vietnamese to do this, are
mhm.
part of that system. That's where it roots in. It roots in
Mhm.
families and loss of family.
Mhm.
And how early on another um this was actually a man, but this woman I just mentioned, whose grandfather had been shot,
Mhm.
she would go undercover into the strategic hamlets where they gathered up villagers and they put them in essentially concentration camps,
Mhm.
um, cordoned off away from the rice fields with ARVN soldiers under our command guarding them. But it was a somewhat porous, right?
Mhm.
And they would leave little lights, little lamps to let her know when she could come in and out, right? They're on the ARVN side, she's on the other side, and she goes through, and
Mhm.
she's carrying messages in her head or whatever. And she was known for being a local organizer
Mhm.
under what we had called the Phoenix program, which was to capture and kill any organizers. There was a bounty on this woman's head. We figured out the arithmetic. It was a teacher's salary for 100 years. That's how much money was equivalent to, right?
Okay.
And she told the story, and I met the man, the child, where she went into a house and caught completely off guard because sitting on a little stoop bed was an ARVN soldiers. That means a Vietnamese soldier on our side. And she's walked in and she's wanted. There is a bounty for her. And
Mhm.
this 3-year-old child ran up and grabbed her by the legs and called her mother. Meh,
Mhm.
meh, meh,
Mhm.
greeting her as if the mother. She was
Mhm.
not the mother at all, right?
Uh-huh.
And And her saying to me, she said to me, we never taught them that,
Ah.
and I subsequently met him when he came with a little child, we were putting him in the hammock, swinging him around. And he said, yes, he said, we were never taught that, but we knew.
Right.
It's just like if you're of a certain background,
Mhm.
if you're of, let's say, Jewish background, you know
Mhm.
somebody is from a Jewish background. I'm from a Quaker background. I know sort of
Mhm.
right off if somebody's from that background, right?
Yeah.
You just can sort of sense it. And there's
Mhm.
maybe a little genetics going on there too, or whatever, but you know.
Yeah.
And he said, we knew. And that child knew there was a threat.
Yeah.
They knew the sides. And as a little one who was 3, he
Right.
grabs up and he grabs the
Right.
mother, who is the liaison, right? Who's the
Mhm.
local organizer. And
Uh-huh.
so it was women who were doing a lot of this. They carried the meds. So another woman, all their their names are all numbers in the South. So this one was second, and the one I'm going to tell you about was 9. That's your
Mhm.
birth order, right?
Okay.
Right, but it begins with second,
Uh-huh.
because if you were first child,
Yeah,
then the evil spirits might snatch you up. So they start by second. Okay.
got it.
The second person is actually the first one.
When you had the ability, privilege, assignment, I'm not sure what it was, to move between South Vietnam and North Vietnam, did you notice any difference in women's contribution roles or perceptions of
Um, I,
DMZ?
I'll add a little there. Of course, the country was completely divided
Yes.
between 1954 and 1975,
Mm-hmm.
just completely divided.
Yeah.
So at the end of the war in 1975, the woman who had been a woman general in the South, very famous, Nguyen Thi Dinh.
Mhm.
So the war is no more fighting. She was a general, all right? She's back. She's up in Hanoi, and she's president of that women's unit. She's a
Got it.
Southerner,
Mm-hmm.
born in the deep, deep, deep South, right?
Yeah.
Does the first, one of the first uprising battles is women. She organized women,
Mhm.
and they had no arms. They, first because the men who had been fighting against the French in the South in 1954, they go north. They go on ships. It's all organized. They go on ships,
Got it.
and right up to the north, and then they're trained up there, and they're the ones who later come back. And there's supposed to be an election in 1956, but we stopped it. U.S. stopped it, and the South Vietnamese government did not allow it. The
Mm-hmm.
reason they did not allow it, and Eisenhower writes about this, if they had, 80% of the people would have voted for Ho Chi Minh. That's
Mm-hmm.
why they didn't allow the elections, what we're seeing right now.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Basically, that's what we're seeing
Yeah.
right now in our own country, building
Yeah.
up to that. Okay, but not going to allow it because we're going to lose, right? So they didn't
Mm-hmm.
allow it. And that leads to more war. Right?
Right.
So those, people and women in the South really kind of, you know, so many of them, if you think about it, it was young men who went to the North in 54, many couples, because they were going to be reunited 2 years later, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a couple, they married to
Yeah.
seal the relationship,
Yeah.
and then the guy left, or the
Yeah.
woman left, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're going to be reunited in
Mm-hmm.
2 years. But that doesn't happen. So they're together for a week or a month, not long,
Uh-huh.
at most 2 months, married, okay, conceive a child,
Right.
right? He goes off or she goes off. They're separated. Adam Ben's
Mm-hmm.
case similar to this, though they did not marry
Mm-hmm.
yet, but they were a couple, nine
Right.
years separated, until they get together, and they do marry and they have kids. Okay, but this other, many of these women I met marry, conceive a child. He goes north. She's behind
Mm-hmm.
with a child, which makes it a lot harder to be undercover when you have a child, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That child does not see the father, if ever,
Right.
from 1954 to 1975. The child is then 20, 21
Okay.
by the time they meet.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally, there were a few cases where that child actually met the father who had come back down to the South to fight. One friend of mine, she's sadly deceased too. Um, she was at the Paris talks, and then she was ambassador at the UN. But she went to go for a 1 month training for journalists in this village where I stayed. And the 1 month ended up being 10, 15 years. She had a 2-year-old, a daughter whom I met, very interesting, 2-year-old. The next time she saw the 2-year-old, the 2-year-old was the mother of a 2-year-old, right?
Oh.
Because that woman who thought she gave her daughter to her sister to take care of, thought she was going for a month. It led to this, to that, to this. She was very
Yeah.
capable, had multiple languages. She
Right.
ends up in Paris or she ends up, when they implement the Paris talks, she's in Saigon.
Mhm.
She moves from being a diplomat to a major in the army, although she has no military experience.
Right.
She's in at Tunson airport on the revolutionary side. Her daughter, her daughter is married. The daughter's husband is the leader of the student uprisings. They're within miles of each other, but can't see each other. That's 73. They don't see each other until 1975. By then, there's a 2-year-old. And the
Right.
interesting thing to me is that daughter showed up at our office one day just by herself. And it was strange to me because it was like I was seeing the mother. She looks exactly like the mother, but she had the same mannerisms. And
Uh-huh.
how could that be? She had her mother's mannerisms and
Uh-huh.
looked like her. I mean, it was like, what is happening here? I'm seeing somebody,
Uh-huh.
somebody giving me some medicine or something.
Yeah.
But, that kind of story is all around.
Alright.
And so all of these people, including your daughter-in-law, whatever that family story is, it,
Right.
it webs everywhere. And the
Yeah.
families were divided because the country was divided.
Got it.
And particularly in a province called Guangxi. And here's how this is what the women did there. And I was just explaining that yesterday or the day before, whatever it was, to this fellow who teaches at the Navy War College. What
Uh,
happened in Guangxi when they divided the country? It was like dividing it on the Connecticut River, right?
okay.
Which
Yeah.
divides New Hampshire and Vermont. I'm right close to the Connecticut River. There
Right.
used to be a bridge, an old bridge that went right across. I could walk
Yeah.
to the bridge, right, from where I am now. And
Mhm.
it would not be too far. And
Right.
families lived on both sides of the river. If you and I were sisters and
Sure.
remarried, I might be in New Hampshire and you'd be in Vermont,
Mhm.
right? We're back and forth all the time.
Yeah.
And we're not wealthy enough to have a horse and buggy, and
Mhm.
we have a little boat.
Mhm.
We have a little canoe, basically, a flat bottom
Uh,
canoe that can actually take a little,
yeah.
just an
Yeah.
Indian type canoe, right? Back
Mhm.
and forth we go, all right?
Mhm.
That's what Guangxi was like. They have
Mhm.
flat bottom canoes back and forth. That's your transport
Uh-huh.
because it's swampy and little canals and
Right.
right. So when they divided, like as if we divided on the Connecticut River, and you and I are sisters, and we each have 6 kids.
Yep.
Those families are big. There's no family planning. All right.
Right.
6 kids. All right. And what you and I do is we swap kids. I give you 3 of mine, and you give me 3 of yours. All right.
Right.
Because we don't know what's going to happen on that division line.
Yeah.
The country's going to be divided for 2 years. That's what we think, 2 years, all right? But we don't know how it's going to be and how the school's going to be and what's the future going to be. And so, and our families are back and forth. They're like, our kids are like
Okay.
siblings, right?
Right.
If they can paddle a canoe, they're back and
Yeah.
forth, right?
Yes.
They're raised together and we're at family gatherings together. And this is true all up and down that river, right? We're all
Mhm.
back and forth. And we're all cousins and distant cousins and third cousins and fourth
Sure.
cousins or whatever, right? So instead of 2 years, from 54 to 75, it's 21 years. So
Yes.
again and again, you have siblings who are fighting each other. Right? I
Uh,
have 3 of your kids,
got it.
and they
Yeah.
joined the North Vietnamese Army. You've got
Mhm.
3 of my kids, and they join the South Vietnamese Army, or
Mhm.
whatever, or
Right.
I have 3 of your kids. They join the North. Your 3 join the South. They are
Mhm.
siblings, and they fight each other.
Mhm.
Follow me?
Yes, I do.
Right? Mhm.
Mhm.
So then post-war, then what?
Right.
Then there is, just a lot of schisms time
Mhm.
after time where siblings have ended up on the different side.
Right.
And there is a great deal of anger and bitterness and,
Mhm.
they're blood kin, they're
Right.
siblings, but pain, just plain
Yeah.
pain,
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
you went one direction and I went another, but we grew up together and we were close. But those decisions made by outsiders divided us and we were stuck. They're
Yeah.
very difficult If you're
Mhm.
occupied, you
Mhm.
go with the flow, right?
Right.
So you have, it's just a huge, huge amount of pain. Now we're many years past that now, but
Ouch.
it becomes generational.
Yes.
And what happens also, and I was talking the other day, this happens to our veterans who were there, it happens to boat people who left, that because any of our veterans who were there were traumatized.
Mhm.
They were all traumatized. They all have PTSD. Um,
Mhm.
those of us who were there willingly had PTSD, but certainly people who were drafted or even enlisted,
Right.
because you are trained to kill, but that puts you in violation of
Mhm.
just about every religious training.
Yes.
Starts with thou shalt not kill. All right. And
Right.
then you have kids and you're trained in violence. And I mean, it disrupts. And you're trained at a point when your prefrontal cortex, this part here, isn't
Yes.
developed, right? So
Yes.
later it develops and you begin to understand what you did, and
Mhm.
you don't understand it. But what happens is that people are stuck in emotionally in whatever was their point. So if they were in Vietnam and they left in 1970, they are stuck in 1970. If it's a boat person and they left in 1979 or 1980 or 1981 or whatever, they're stuck in terms of Vietnam in that point. And for
Mhm.
them, that's Vietnam. The veteran, the boat person, unless they've gone back, they're
Mhm.
stuck.
Right.
And the mind, the same for someone who was in Iraq or Afghanistan, your your emotions have you locked in the place where you were traumatized. And until some other experience happens for you that is more than a film, where for me, taking back many veterans back to Vietnam, um, they just go through a huge shuddering because all that they've hung on to doesn't fit.
Right.
It's a place where everybody's roaring around. They all look 20 years old, and many of them are 20 years old. They are all dramatically younger
Mhm.
than we are. It's a very youthful, demographically youthful population. They're all on motorbikes. They're having a great time.
Yeah.
They're not a threat to anybody. They want to be friends. They
Right.
absolutely want to be friends. And that doesn't fit with what you think they should be feeling.
Yeah.
And you're expecting them to stab you.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
you can't, it's discordant
Right.
because the image that's in your mind doesn't fit. And they end up just weeping,
Mm.
because it forces them to let go. Because
Mhm.
what they're carrying in their mind, it doesn't release the pain, it
Mm.
releases the imagery that's not accurate.
Right.
And the imagery is not accurate. The pain is the pain is there. But the bitterness, which is twisted pain,
Mm.
dissolves because you can't stand up against it. You go into a beer hall, it's a little sidewalk beer stall,
Right.
and they come right up to you and start talking. And somebody speaks English and they find out if you're a veteran, where did you fight? Where were you? Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. And they know somebody. And somebody runs off, and within 10 or 15 minutes, here comes the veteran you fought against,
Right.
right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
here he comes, right? Holding out his
Mhm.
hand, right? Wanting to shake hands, right?
Yeah.
Show you where, here's my souvenir, right? Or whatever.
Yes.
Right? And you
Absolutely.
have an interpreter, right?
Oh,
You have an
yeah.
interpreter, right?
Yeah.
And on just the most local level, on the most
Mhm.
local level. And it's for a long time that's been buttressed by the senior most level. We want to
Mhm.
be friends with every nation, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
way up, the very senior
Mhm.
higher level. That happened. That happened very quickly in 1990. The moment they had peace, and that was 1990, first
Mhm.
time, then immediately I could talk to anybody on the street. And before that, I wouldn't do that because I'm an American. I'm clearly foreign. They're going, look, I'm
Yeah.
definitely foreign. And they were not allowed to talk to foreigners because they were still at war,
Yes.
including with the US until 1990. We backed the Khmer Rouge and we backed the Chinese invasion,
Got it.
two Cold Wars that we were part of, and a very ferocious embargo to make it as hard as possible for them to live.
Mhm.
So, the superstructure has to deal with that. But the moment that settles out, end of 1989, 1990,
Mhm.
there people would come up to me and they were
Yeah.
desperately poor, but that lid that was held on everything was off because they had peace. And when you have peace, then you can build. You can build and
Mhm.
it won't,
Yes.
your youth are not going to be killed. It's crazy that my people in my country say it ended in 75 because we backed the border war. Well, she said, well, yeah, I was there and I had just sat with her, with her army team, right? She fought in that war against the
Mhm.
Chinese. And all
Right.
of them pulled up out of high school, right? It's their high school class. They had to
Mhm.
go fight, women and men. And all everybody's involved. So if
Mhm.
you're not in combat, you're doing something,
Got it.
right? It was
Yeah.
totally, North Vietnam was totally
Yes.
mobilized.
Yes.
And the resistance in the South, they were mobilized. They were helping in some way. You're
Yeah.
raising food, you were, oh, this woman, ninth, June,
Mhm.
um, carrying meds, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Somebody else, she didn't know where they came from. But
Mhm.
then this woman second was the one who organized the routes. So then I met the people who ran the pharmacy,
Right.
who were on the Arvin side. So people thought,
Mhm.
and out of that pharmacy were the meds that went boom, 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 right? But it's checkerboarded,
Yeah.
and they had these little, they call them suong. It's like a flat bottom canoe,
Mhm.
shallow because this is, it's a tide water. It's
Mhm.
sweet water, but it's tide water, right?
Yeah.
So the time of day of when you can go, and a web, a bayou, a web, right? And so you have to be local to know it.
Yeah.
And they would load arms, captured
Mhm.
arms often. And on top of that, they would put vats. This is women doing this. Vats
Mhm.
of Nook Mom. You probably know what Nook Mom is, fish sauce,
Oh, yes.
right?
Yeah.
It's stinky,
It is.
right? It's a very
Yes, it
hard
is.
aroma for Americans to get through.
Yes, it is.
Woo, fine for me, right? But not initially, right?
Yeah.
And what they knew was that Americans found it a nauseating smell. So they would put the arms on the bottom and then they would put boards and then they put vats of Nukmam
Uh-huh.
and nobody would stop them. And
Uh,
they're smuggling arms.
okay.
And
Oh.
for the Tet Offensive in Saigon, what they did was they put the arms um, in coffins,
Mhm.
and nobody will stop an ox cart hauling
Surgeon.
a coffin. Poor
So,
people hauling a coffin. It's either
yeah.
going to a funeral, it's been to the funeral, and there's a dead person in it, right? No, no, it's filled with arms.
Okay. You were talking about the individual stories of Vietnamese women, what brought them into it? It was
Right.
a childhood memory. It was some trauma they endured by watching someone they loved. And yesterday I was at a Holocaust historian was talking yesterday and and I was saying to my husband, where is our line going to be? How far are we going to let this go before it matters enough to me as a white woman in a white suburb in a
Right.
white state to stand up and say, "Oh hell no, that is a bridge too
Right.
far."
Right.
And because if it means it has to it, that it and she said, history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes.
Rhymes.
Yes, history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes.
Oh,
And
wow.
I'm fascinated by that and I'm going to try to have her on as a podcast guest to lead with that because I'm
Right.
so curious. But it's like so because when I look at history and I hear stories like you just told us, it is that when it becomes personal enough, then you will do whatever it takes.
Right.
My children, my community, my where is the line? But we are such a global civilization with all of the information now that we didn't have in
Right.
1975 to know what was happening in the moment on the ground, unless you were in the moment on the ground with those eyes. That how can I separate my mother's heart to only my nuclear family when I see what's happening on the Gaza Strip?
Right.
I can't. My heart bleeds for that. How do I, where is my line where I'm going to say, and I will give my life for this cause? Because that's what it's going to take. That's the
Right.
commitment that is required to have the level of organization it took to withstand colonialism.
Right. And it is true that we have more information, but we also have a heady amount of disinformation, just
Yes.
plain falsehood,
Yes.
effectively presented, and so effectively presented that it's addictive, that you can't let yourself be exposed to something else. And
Hmm.
and the so there's that. And we now have an insidious system
Yeah.
that's determined to knock off piece by piece. So it
Mhm.
makes it very, it makes it very difficult. Knock off the universities, knock off the legal organizations,
Right.
knock off the NGOs, knock off individuals, knock off uh, anything that involves a person who's black or brown or
Hmm.
gold or red or purple or blue or whatever, right?
Uh,
Um, it's, one by, and very fast, by illegal decrees and degrees, and
hmm.
where there's no recourse because the judicial system is also controlled. So it's
Right.
very, very difficult. And I think and for me, I try, what can I do? What should I do?
Hmm.
And I think it comes, uh, one of the things that I try to use just for myself is in making decisions is
Hmm.
what is something that only I can do or would do. Only I will do this. Only I will write this. Only I will
Right.
do this, um, what I'm doing right now, because we're in this anniversary time in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm sort of busy trying to correct the narrative, their
Hmm.
narrative, even for Vietnamese, saying, there's
Hmm.
this piece, there's that piece, there's this piece. It's not, no, their Declaration of Independence does not quote ours, right? And
Hmm.
I've been head to toe with the major scholar at Dartmouth about this. No, if you take the Vietnamese document and you translate it into English, you don't get all men are created equal. You get
Uh,
each and every person is created equal. They changed it. They
uh,
changed it. And when they changed it, that was a revolution for women.
hmm.
And they had no rights in Vietnam, and it was a revolution for ethnic minority people who had zero, zero, zero rights, right? Organizing that's being done by groups like Indivisible or local groups.
Hmm.
Local groups are getting local ordinances done
Yeah.
of what can be allowed in this community or that community, where
Hmm.
they hold local leadership or state leadership
Hmm.
responsible. But it's really hard.
Yeah.
It's very hard. And but if we don't,
Hmm. It's
then
going to
what?
be harder. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's right. I mean, we
Right.
need we need to be doing it. What's been fascinating, and this is what I appreciate about Rachel Maddow's coverage, is that she's covering that resistance. And
Yeah.
she puts up on the screen, so it's my
Hmm.
little computer screen, but they're 20 little blocks with
Hmm.
demonstrations in 20 different little towns.
Yeah.
So there's Homer, Alaska, and I email my friends in Homer and say, I was looking for you. I look, I didn't see you. And they say, yes, we were there, but we weren't in that picture. Right? right? And people show up. We have to be scrupulous, really scrupulous locally in supervising that elections can happen fairly.
Yeah.
That, that
Right.
people, everybody can vote, who
Mhm.
is eligible to vote. And we're not changing who can vote, which is part of what he's going to do too, right? That's
Right.
the whole idea about a new census, right? We're going to
Mhm.
change and not put some people in the census and then they can't vote. And
Sure.
right, I mean, it's got a real web of disaster. Um,
Mhm.
and and it's working on every level.
And I started this actually in 2020. I started trying to figure out how to get women of a certain age, my certain age,
Right,
to who are already in retirement to figure out, because the George Floyd story and the video hit us
right,
blindsided right through our white bubble and into our
right.
mother's hearts, okay? And
Mhm.
created
Right,
response, not just reaction, but response. But after a while, like 2 or 3 months, the women that I knew in my age group were beginning to feel like, well, I can't go to a protest and I'm past that. And the black women were tired of using their labor to try to teach us what we didn't know, because like they need one more white ally, like they need a
right,
hole in the head, which is what we've since learned.
right,
And so other than our little book studies or our little whatevers, they just decided to just go back into the white bubble and just focus on my next little hobby project or my next little, and that's what happened. So through this election cycle, I pulled in and said, I can't unsee it. And now we're in an election cycle where what was being threatened was we are a blended family, a late in life blended family.
right,
And between us, we have dozens of grandchildren and a few children and dozens of grandchildren. And if we ever got everybody together for one family photo, we would have some of everything. Everything that they are trying to get rid of, outlaw, or ban, we have
right,
in our inner circle.
right,
And we love passionately. And it was like, I don't, I no longer have, and that was my line in the sand. There it is,
right,
because it's my family now.
right,
I
right.
no longer had the privilege of stepping into my little bubble and going to my hobby and pretending that was happening over there and not here. Well, thank you. That was
Yeah,
my aha moment from
good.
today.
Yes. So, and that's what,
It was my line.
right, right. And I
Yeah.
think we need to understand that if we don't, and we do what we can
Mhm. Yeah.
wherever we can, but
Yeah.
it's assuring the local elections, running
Mhm.
for office. I mean, the thing, if people are retired
Mhm.
now, this is different now in this generation. People who
Mhm.
are retired have, and particularly women, right?
Mhm.
They got all the skills.
Mhm.
If they're lucky, they
Yeah.
have good health, right? Run for local office,
Mhm.
get in the local positions
Mhm.
to say no, or
Mhm.
yes, we have to do this. And because we can be, and we now have women spotted in many key places. I got her name, but the mayor of Los Angeles, very
Yeah.
strong
Yes.
spokesperson, just strong people.
Mhm.
And but they need some people under them.
Yes.
And I think we can do things locally,
Mhm.
very locally, and that's what bubbles up. You figure out, what is it that I can do, because I have my personality is such I could do this, this, or this, and
Mhm.
my skills are such I can do that and that.
Mhm.
I'm not good at this,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
I think when you talk about leadership, I go back now, say, to Ho Chi Minh, and Vietnamese don't recognize this. Brilliant. One of the areas of brilliance was that he could choose people.
Mhm.
he could see what their skills were that they didn't realize
Yeah.
that he needed, but he
Mhm.
could see the skill. And then he could direct them and say,
Mhm.
this, and this, and try this and try that. And off they'd go. They were
Right.
bright, capable, and they had some direction, and
Mhm.
they were backed.
Yeah.
And I think, we can do that with each other. What can we do? And
Mhm.
I can do this, I can do that. And
Oh.
when I was talking about this local movement that developed in my neighborhood in Ohio, the next county was women there who developed it when they
Mhm.
began to go under the farms, which destroys, the mining goes under the farm. It
Right.
splits the earth above, the houses drop into the hole, the trees drop into the
Mhm.
hole, the rivers drop into the hole. It's barren land.
Mhm.
It's called longwell mining. So
Okay.
we knew the lawyer who had worked on that. We had a lawyer who was local and knew about it. I wrote the letters to the editor.
Mhm.
My neighbor worked in that mine in the next county. We never spoke to each other. But I drafted anything. Our two mailboxes, the end of my road, are right next to each other. I put the drafts in the mailbox, and the 6-year-old child took the draft to the mom, who read it to the father. We never spoke. And it's exactly what
Okay.
women and families did in the South, we were about to be occupied by this huge
Mhm.
American Electric Power. They came scouting, and he
Mhm.
played dumb farmer and I played dumb school bus driver. Both of us, we learned later, we both, just took on theater without ever consulting.
Mhm.
Got him to show us maps and all kinds of stuff. Because it's dumb school, but I know I can speak the dialect. So
I
she
love
doesn't know
it.
anything. Well, she could read a map.
Uh-huh.
So, there's just so much that we can do. I think we go to the
Mhm.
people we know,
Mhm.
and I
So
know there'll be some major organized, indivisible organized, there'll be major events.
right.
I think it's sort of like almost every week sometimes people are doing.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot and growing.
And
I
growing.
follow Midas Touch Network, so I
Ah,
used to watch MSNBC a lot, and then for 100 reasons stopped after the elections. But
Midas.
Midas Touch
One word.
is, yeah, and it's MEIDAS Touch
Oh,
Network. And they're on Substack, they're on YouTube, they're on
okay.
everywhere. But
I,
they are independent media who is
oh,
who are unapologetically pro-democracy.
mhm.
And they are covering the things that our mainstream media
Doesn't cover.
anymore because
Right.
because they don't want to get sued or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
And so they are covering all of it. And so all of these resistance things that are happening, you can see live coverage from every major city and every minor city through Midas Touch. And as people are getting 86'd off of mainstream media, they are going over and doing some podcasting with Midas Touch. So like Joy Reid, you can see her.
Ah,
Yeah,
right.
so we
Because see, I
didn't
used to
lose
watch her.
them. They're
Okay.
going underground, and Midas Touch Network is your underground network. And they're under attack because, after all, they're getting more visibility than Fox News, and it's making people crazy.
Right. So, and I think that's part of what, and like the South Park work and stuff like that, that this is what, and I don't know about this. So, and I
Yeah.
used to watch Joy Reid until she got bounced, which of
There
course
you
I was
go.
one of the
Well,
angry people.
Katie
And
Fang, you're going to see her over
uh,
there. You're going to see Joy Reid. You're going to see Acosta. Yeah. And every time somebody gets bounced, Midas Touch is building momentum from people like me who are paid subscribers for the content. It's like,
right.
you know, just because it's reliable, trustworthy, timely reporting. I'll take it.
Oh, thank you. I'm very, very glad to know about this.
Yeah,
Oh,
good.
oh. Well,
Thank
I'm
you
so
so
glad
much.
to meet you, and I hope we get to meet in person sometime.
Yes.
Oh,
Uh,
and I
and it
thank you.
shouldn't be hard to do. Michelle is speaking in 2 weeks somewhere. She invited my husband and I. We'll be there.
Okay, good. All right, so
Terrific.
I'll get to see you then.
All
Perfect.
right. Thank
Great.
you for your
So
time.
thanks again. All right,
All
okay.
right.
Bye now.
Bye.